Before the Passover celebration, Jesus knew that his hour had come to leave this world and return to his Father. He had loved his disciples during his ministry on earth, and now he loved them to the very end. It was time for supper, and the devil had already prompted Judas, son of Simon Iscariot, to betray Jesus. Jesus knew that the Father had given him authority over everything and that he had come from God and would return to God. So he got up from the table, took off his robe, wrapped a towel around his waist, and poured water into a basin. Then he began to wash the disciples' feet, drying them with the towel he had around him. When Jesus came to Simon Peter, Peter said to him, "Lord, are you going to wash my feet?" Jesus replied, "You don't understand now what I am doing, but someday you will." "No," Peter protested, "you will never, ever wash my feet." Jesus replied, "Unless I wash you, you won't belong to me." Simon Peter exclaimed, "Then wash my hands and head as well, Lord, not just my feet." Jesus replied, "A person who has bathed all over does not need to wash, except for the feet, and to be entirely clean. And you disciples are clean, but not all of you." For Jesus knew who would betray him. That is what he meant when he said, "Not all of you are clean." After washing their feet, he put on his robe again and sat down and asked, "Do you understand what I was doing? You call me teacher and Lord, and you are right, because that's what I am. And since I, your Lord and teacher, have washed your feet, you ought to wash each other's feet. I have given you an example to follow. Do as I have done to you. I tell you the truth. Slaves are not greater than their master, nor is the messenger more important than the one who sends the message. Now that you know these things, God will bless you for doing them."
Well, thank you, Carissa, for reading that. So obviously today we're going to be looking at verses in chapter 13 of John. So last week, Todd kicked off our series, The Way, the Truth, and the Life, and it's not quite the second half, but almost half of the book of John. And it all takes place in 1 week. We typically celebrate this week leading up to Easter. It's considered the Passion of Christ or Holy Week. But we thought as we're doing this study on John that we would just go ahead and do it right now. You see, the first half of John takes place over about a 3-year period, and it's the earthly ministry of Jesus. But the last part all happens in about a week, and Jesus is doing some of his most clear, intensive teaching in this last week of his life. Because he knows he's got to prepare his disciples because he's going to be leaving, he's going to face his death, he's going to go to heaven, and he'll send back his Spirit, but he knows that they're going to be the ones that will build his church, that will start his church, and they need to be ready. Well, we'll see today they weren't quite up to speed, they weren't quite ready, and it's understandable that they weren't. But what I want to talk about today in chapter 13 is Jesus' mission. And the next 2 weekends, I'm talking this week and next week, about death of sorts. This week about the death of self. Because Jesus talks about unless we're willing to die, we cannot live. And unless we are willing to die to ourselves, we'll never be able to carry out the mission that he has given us. Next week, I'm going to talk about more the physical death. Jesus' clearest teaching on heaven and the afterlife. And I'm looking forward to that. So think about that. You might want to read ahead and read chapter 14 next week, especially the first 6 or 7 verses of it. But let's go ahead and dive in, because this week Jesus is preparing his disciples, and he's addressing them using the example of washing of feet. Now let me just give you a little bit of context here. In the Gospel of John, it doesn't talk about the bread and the cup. It only talks about the foot washing at the Last Supper. In the other 3 Gospels, Matthew, Mark, and Luke, it talks about the bread and the cup, but not the foot washing. And you really have to look at all of these Gospels, that's what they're called because it's good news, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, kind of together to get the full picture, because they were recorded by 4 different men over a period of time. But they tell the whole story when put together. And so let me give you a little bit of background. There had been a little bit of a dispute that had arisen between the disciples because they still aren't quite getting it. They still see Jesus as a conquering king who's going to basically reestablish Israel and lay low Rome. Even though he's told them, my kingdom is not like that, they're still having a hard time grasping it, as we do, because it's not the way the world thinks. And so there's a dispute over, well, Jesus, when you establish your kingdom, can I be the Secretary of State and can I be the Vice President? Basically, can I have a position at your right and at your left? And Jesus is saying, well, let me show you and let me tell you what I'm talking about. And you have to go to Luke chapter 22, verses 25 through 27 to kind of get the full effect of what Jesus is about ready to show them and why. Jesus told them, in this world, the kings and great men lord it over their people, yet they are called friends of the people. But among you, I don't know how much clearer he could be, but among you it will be different. Those who are the greatest among you should take the lowest rank, and the leader should be like a servant. Who is more important, the one who sits at the table or the one who serves? The one who sits at the table, of course. Listen to this, but not here. I am among you as one who serves. Now, there's a little play on words here. He's talking about himself. I am among you as one who serves. But think about what he referred to himself as in the Old Testament when Israel asked him, what should we call you? And he said, I am. The great I am. The great I am in the person of Jesus says, I am among you as one who serves. You see, Jesus is standing on the doorstep of the greatest contradiction in history. That God would come to earth in the person of Jesus Christ, and he would die for his creation so that we wouldn't have to pay the price for our disobedience and rebellion. I mean, that's a contradiction because no king comes to serve, no king comes to be killed, and they still didn't get it. But really, if you think about it, no culture actually does get it. And today, when we look at this foot washing, it's a symbol of all of this. And what Jesus is trying to teach them is the way up is down. And that's a lesson we have to take away from this text with us today. The way up is down. You see, Jesus is illustrating what his purpose is. I think too much of life is like too many of our lives are like a cool machine. It's like this great machine that is really cool, it's pretty, it makes cool sounds, but it doesn't come with an owner's manual. So we really don't know what it's supposed to do. We don't know what it's for. And I think sometimes, if you think about the way most of us live, it's like we are trapped in some huge Xbox game and we don't know how to get out. I know nothing about Xbox, so some of you, is that even a thing anymore? I was going to say Nintendo, but I think that ship has sailed. But anyway, I was never even into that. But I thought I'd use a cool example to have some street cred with our younger group, the under 50 crowd today. And Solomon talked about it this way. He said, it's like chasing after the wind. Why do we live the way we live? To get the life we want. We go to the right schools. We get the right jobs. We make the right amount of money. We marry the right person. We have the right kinds of kids to get the life we want. But if we're not sure what the life we want is all about or why we want it, it's going to make no sense to us, which I think can explain how we as a culture have more than any culture has ever had. And yet we still don't know why we're here and we're less and less happy. Because I think what we realize at the end of the day when we achieve those things, and again, there's nothing wrong with achievement. There's nothing wrong with pursuing goals and dreams. There's nothing wrong with that. But if those are the end in and of themselves, we're going to go, okay, here I'm sitting on a pile of money in the house I always dreamed of, and my kids are awesome, my wife's awesome, but I can't take any of this with me. So what was it really all about? Well, Jesus is going to answer that for us today. You see, because once you accept Christ, you really begin to understand what life is all about. You see, because the minute you accept Jesus and you make him the Lord of your life, you're handed an owner's manual. It's called the Bible, which is why we've titled this series, The Way, the Truth, and the Life. Jesus is the way, the truth, and the life, and all of Scripture points toward this week in history that we're talking about, and this person named Jesus Christ, and his followers, and the message that he was going to leave them before he left. And so today, we're going to look at what Jesus says life is all about. And what we're going to see is this: life, according to Jesus, is about kneeling love. And we're going to look at two things. We're going to look at it's what Jesus lived for, and it's what he calls us to. So let's look first at this kneeling love. And I'm using kneeling love as what he did when he knelt down to wash the disciples' feet. He was modeling for them the kind of kneeling love, which is what our purpose in life as followers of Jesus is all about. That's our purpose. That was his purpose. That's the one he passes along to us. And it is that very purpose and that very ability for the disciples to ultimately grasp that they would kneel down low and serve others. That's what changed the world. That's what got Rome's attention. And from this small band of believers, believing in Jesus Christ who washed their feet, the world has changed forever. And there are millions and millions and millions and millions of us worshiping today. I just got to say, I got to ask the question, if you were going to create a religion, I mean, who'd make this stuff up and expect anybody to believe it? I've never thought of Jesus as a marketing genius. And yet he is the head of the largest enterprise that has ever existed on the face of the earth. But everything about what he told people should run them off instead of draw them in. It makes you wonder, is it really true? I think it is. So let's dive in. Kneeling love is what Jesus lives for. Let's look at verses 3 through 5 in John chapter 13. Jesus knew that the Father, now listen to this very carefully. Jesus knew that the Father had given him authority over everything and that he had come from God and would return to God. Now, think about that. Jesus had been given authority, power, influence from God directly over everything. What would you suspect that your average normal person would do with that? They would create a great kingdom, and they would rule over people with all that authority. Hey, I'm in authority. I'd wear the crown. I'd wear all the vestments. I'd carry the scepter. I mean, I'd be the man. I'd be the king. I'd be the Lord. I'd be all that. Jesus knew that he had been given authority by God over all things, and what does he do with it? He gets up from the table, takes off his robe, wraps a towel around his waist, pours water into a basin, then he begins to do the most lowly thing that a person in that culture could do. He began to wash his disciples' feet. What? No wonder the disciples were confused. You see, Jesus is showing his disciples what the mission is. And a couple things that scream out of this passage that are just so totally, radically unique to Christianity. The first one is that God came to earth. Emmanuel, we celebrate this every year in December, right? Emmanuel, this is truly unique among all religions in the world. That God would leave heaven, leave his throne, come down, because I'll tell you what, in about every other religion, every other mythological story, when the king comes down to earth, it is not good news for the earthlings. But this is different. But not only did God come to earth, he came down as a servant. Paul describes this better than anywhere else in Scripture in Philippians chapter 2 when he says, now, he's talking to the Christians in Philippi, he says, now, be an imitator of Jesus. Imitate Jesus, who being in very nature God, did not consider equality with God something to be grasped. Rather, he emptied himself of his divine rights and privileges, became a servant, and ultimately died a criminal's death so that we could have life. Not only did God come to earth, but what did he come to earth to do? To serve us. To be crushed, not to conquer. You see, because he knows, even today we should know, the only way to reverse the curse of Genesis chapter 3, which is where sin entered the world, is not through power, not through conquering the enemy, not through might, not through strength. It's through sacrifice and service and ultimately dying so that life might happen. You know, yesterday, Cookie was gone, and it's football season. And I think I calculated last night when I finally turned the television off about 11 o'clock, I'd watched about 8 hours of football. My soul is so full today. I did think, that's a little much, but I love college football. And today's pro football. And the Bengals are playing the Chiefs at 4:30, so I'm trusting God for the outcome of that. Because it doesn't look good. Anyway, I digress. But in football, they use a term, and we use it otherwise, but there's a term called, take the hit. You got to take the hit. You know, you see yesterday, I saw it all day. I mean, you know, a quarterback stays in the pocket, ready to pass the ball. He stays and stays and stays and stays as the defenders are rushing in on him. He stays long enough to get a receiver to open, and he throws the ball. That's why they wear flak jackets, because if you ever got hit with somebody's head with a missile head on top of it in the ribs, it hurts. But he took the hit. The pass is complete. He's the hero. Now, the reason he took the hit might very well be because a lineman didn't do his job. And I know because I was a lineman. And I hated watching the film the day after games. Because if your quarterback got hit, you got yelled at. You're thinking, okay, that's awesome. What's your point? Jesus took the hit for us. It doesn't matter why he took the hit. He took the hit. It doesn't matter what we did. We may have failed. We may have been like one of those linemen that sinned and let the linebacker through. And the quarterback got hit. It doesn't matter. But he took the hit for us. And he calls us to do the same. Don't worry, that's not an incoming invasion. That's a crop duster. It's cool to watch, isn't it, the yellow plane? So anyway, wish you could wait till Sunday afternoon, but that's beside the point. But here's the thing. We're to do likewise. What does that look like? And this is going to be a challenge. It's a challenge for all of us. For the last several years, I've had the privilege of being on the board of directors for Fellowship Mission, and it's a ministry in this community that I love dearly. I'm so proud of Eric and Tammy Lane for starting this ministry so many years ago. There was a deep need in our community to serve the homeless population among us. Now, the reason I bring this up is this, because we can look at, let's say, that population, the homeless population in our community, and say there's a lot of mental health issues, a lot of addiction, a lot of bad choices, almost always alienation from their families. And it's easy to look at that population and go, well, it's their own damn fault. I say that for effect. And I still have a couple cuss words this year. But I hear Christians say that. And it doesn't matter why they are homeless. If I'm following Jesus here, they are my responsibility. And you can say that about any number of people that maybe you criticize on a regular basis, and it may very well be their fault. But it is my and your responsibility as followers of Jesus Christ who call ourselves his church. Read church history. Some of it's really ugly. And it's most ugly when we don't do that. And it's most beautiful when we do. And you're saying, well, it's not my responsibility. I didn't get myself into that mess. Was it Jesus' responsibility that you chose to sin and he had to die for your sins? No, but he took the hit. He took the responsibility for that. You see, we live in a hit first or a hit back culture. We live in an upside down kingdom. But what Jesus is clearly showing us today is kneeling love takes the hit. instead of giving it out. You see, Jesus is painting a picture of the cross. And this is the gospel, where the God of the universe took the hit for his creation who rebelled against him. And here's the problem. Religion in the name of Jesus operates exactly like the world does too often. If you think about it. Oh, wait, he can't take the hit. It's kind of like what Peter did. He said, no, you can't wash me. You can't, no. I'll get to that in a second. You see, religion operates just like the world. And why do so many people reject God? Because they feel rejected, shamed, unworthy, and they're mad at religious abusers. Now, I got to tell you, this county is full of it. John 13:8. No, Peter protested, you will never, ever wash my feet. And what did Jesus say? Peter, unless I wash you, you're not going to belong to me. In other words, unless I wash you, you'll never be clean. But don't we do the same thing? Really? We've grown up believing, I got to work hard to earn God's love. I got to quit sinning. I got to start this. I got to do that. Nothing wrong with those things, but not for salvation. The law is good, just not to save you. The law is good in that it can tell you how to live, but it's also good to show you need a Savior because you can't clean yourself up. So I would say quit trying to clean yourself up and surrender to the one who can clean you up. But I think that's part of why we have a hard time kneeling before those that God calls us to love. Because somehow or another we think we've earned the right to lord above them. Which is very normal and human, by the way, but this is not what we're called to. And here's part of our problem, why so many of us miss Jesus. I want you to listen to this very carefully because I don't want to be misunderstood. If you want to find Jesus, quit looking up. Start looking down. Now, if you want to see God the King, you got to look up. But when he came to earth, he knelt before the lowest. He knelt before us to wash our feet. It was called dying on the cross. Because secondly, kneeling love is what Jesus calls us to in verses 14 through 17, where he says, and since I, your Lord and teacher, have washed your feet, you ought to wash each other's feet. I've given you an example to follow. Do as I have done for you. I tell you the truth, slaves are not greater than their master, nor is the messenger more important than the one who sends the message. Now that you know these things, God will bless you for doing them. Jesus knew the disciples weren't getting this, and so he's like, I know I'm going to be gone here soon. They have got to get this. You see, kneeling love, practically speaking, is about bringing shalom to those around us. Now, what do I mean by shalom? I don't know if you remember a few months back when we were doing this series on servanthood, and I talked about a passage out of Jeremiah 29 where Nebuchadnezzar basically enslaved the best and the brightest of Israel, brought them into Babylon, and they were going to be there for a very, very long time, 70 years. And they're like, this is our most dreaded and hated enemy. How could there be anything good come out of this? And they thought that maybe God would deliver them like he delivered Israel from Pharaoh through Moses. But instead, when God spoke to Jeremiah, he gave him some very, very unpopular words to pass along to the Israelites. He said, now that you're captive in Babylon, he goes, I'm not going to rescue you, not for 70 years. I'm not going to deliver you. What I want you to do is I want you to make yourself at home there. I want you to plant gardens and trees. I want you to build cities. I want you to have children. I want you to bless the land. And this had to be scandalous to the Israelites. They're like, what? We hate these people. I thought you hated them too. God said, do that, bring shalom to Babylon, but do not bow to their idols and respectfully resist their values. And I think we find ourselves in many respects in the same place, not nearly as intense as that, in our world today. if we're going to reach our communities, this is how we do it. By showing Jesus' love versus the world's love. Jesus' love says, I want the best for you. Worldly love, even the best of worldly love, says, I want the best for me. If I marry you, then I will be loved and I will be complete because you love me. And it should be just the opposite. Maybe this is why we have so many problems in our marriages. It's like we should go into a marriage, I'm here to love you, for you. And I want to help Jesus help you. Can you imagine how different some of your conversations this afternoon might be in your home if you had that attitude, that kneeling love kind of attitude in your own marriage? Well, it's fine out in the community, at work, and all that stuff, and at church, but not at home. Not at work. What if we became known as people of kneeling love, where we live, work, and play? Might make a big difference, and I'd probably do a lot less marriage counseling. And here's the irony about that. You're probably going to get more opportunities to advance into positions of influence than you can imagine if you would just make it about that, not about you and your advancement. Now, this is counterintuitive stuff, I realize. But when I encounter someone like this, I always walk away feeling better. Somebody who's genuinely interested in loving and serving me, not because, and that sounds really self-serving. I love it when people serve me. No, I do. I actually do. But I mean, when somebody is with you and you feel valued, truly listened to, truly heard, truly seen, and that's what we need. You see, when we really grasp what Jesus did for us and are amazed, like Todd talked about last weekend, are just completely amazed by this love, by this relationship, by this thing that God has done for us, something radical happens. And I want you to listen to this very carefully because I think this is really, really maybe at the heart of what Jesus was trying to teach here. When you really understand what Jesus did when he was washing the disciples' feet, you begin to realize this. You realize that you are nobody's creditor. Nobody owes you a thing. That instead you are everyone's debtor. Just try to wrap your brain around that for a bit. When you really grasp the reality of what Jesus is teaching us here, you realize you're nobody's creditor. Nobody owes you a thing. Instead, you are everyone's debtor. Because you're rich in Christ. And here's the thing. We really struggle with this one. The world owes us nothing. The government owes us nothing. People owe us nothing. Because we have everything we need in Jesus, it shouldn't matter. And you know what? If we would do this for ourselves, here's what would happen to us. We would become unoffendable. Best book I've read in a long time was this little paperback that my sister-in-law sent Cookie and I, and I think I've talked about it before. I think Brant Hansen's the guy's name. It's called Unoffendable. You should just read it. I mean, I'm telling you, I get no royalties for this thing because it's a cheap book anyway. It was so simple and so good. We spent so much time being offended. And you see, the disciples, they got to the point where they were unoffendable, and like Paul said, he wasn't a disciple, but like Paul said, to live is Christ, to die is gain. What do you do with somebody like that? The Romans didn't have a clue what to do with these Christians. They're like, yeah, we're still going to love your outcasts. We're going to love the Roman outcasts. We're going to set up hospitals and nurseries, and we're going to save the babies. It's mostly baby girls that you throw outside of the city to die because you don't want a girl. So we're going to take them in and we're going to raise them. And we don't care if you kill us. We don't care. Because we have everything we need in Jesus. So have at it. You don't owe me anything. No matter what you say, it's not going to offend me. Now, I realize you're like, you got to be kidding me. I know. I was just talking to a guy the other day about this. It's like when somebody comes at you and gets in your face, I mean, my first reaction is to like, no, you're not going to do that. The hardest thing in the world is just not be offended and to not get angry, to not get upset, to not let them get under your skin. Why let their problems and their anger and their issues become yours? Take the hit. Maybe eventually they'll stop and go, what is wrong with you? Well, let me tell you. This teaching, I'm going to have the band start to make their way up, and we're going to do communion in just a second, but this teaching is what enabled the disciples and ultimately the early church to change the world. And I'm going to talk about this down the road in a few weeks, but if you think about it, the church is growing in almost every part of the world except for Europe and now the United States. But you know why? In Europe, they made Christianity reputable and acceptable and common. And it became part of the government institution. And the church is dying. And parts of the world where Christians are being persecuted and where they're being forced to live by this principle, the church is thriving. And I want that to happen here in our culture. And I can't think of a better way to end our time together today than by celebrating communion together. Because of all of the sacraments and all of the practices that we as Christians have had over the centuries, this one is closest to the heart of what Jesus was trying to teach his disciples and what he's trying to teach us in John 13. If you want to live, die. Owe no man anything but to love. I think he's very clear. And today, as you take the elements, I want you to think about what he told his disciples the night of his betrayal and arrest and just days before his death. Let's go ahead and take the bread. He said, as often as you eat this bread, remember that I will give my body as a sacrifice for you. I will take the hit for you. And as often as you drink from this cup, remember that my blood will be shed, so yours doesn't have to be. I will take the hit for you. And I know we so deeply desire, because I think God placed this desire in us, we want to take a stand against the injustices and the wrongs that we see around us today, don't we? But Jesus is saying, if you want to take a stand, you got to kneel. So we're going to end our time together today, and I'll come back up and I'll dismiss us, but let's stand together as we sing of this very, very thing.
You stood before creation, eternity in your hand. You spoke the earth into motion, my soul now to stand. You stood before my failure and carried the cross for my shame. My sin weighed upon your shoulders, my soul now but offer this heart, oh God, completely to you. So I'll walk upon salvation, your Spirit alive in me. This life to declare your promise, my soul now to stand. So what could I say? What could I do? Offer this heart, oh God, completely to you. So what could I say? What could I do? Offer this heart, oh God, completely to you. I'll stand with arms high and heart abandoned in awe of the one who gave it all. I'll stand, my soul, Lord, to you surrender all. I am is yours. I'll stand with arms high and heart abandoned in awe of the one who gave it all. I'll stand, my soul, Lord, to you surrender all. I am is yours. I'll stand with arms high and heart abandoned in awe of the one who gave it all. I'll stand, my soul, Lord, to you surrendered all. I am is yours. All I am is yours.
The next chapter in John is where Jesus makes sense out of what I just talked about. Because if there's not a place that he is preparing for us in heaven, and if this life is all we have, this message today makes absolutely no sense. But if there is a place, and I believe there is, and he is there preparing it for us now, what happens in this life is insignificant compared to eternity. So go out into this world with an attitude of kneeling love. And as hard as it is, ask the Holy Spirit to help you take the hit for someone else this week. Let's do it for Jesus, for his honor, for his glory, and for his kingdom. Go in peace. Thanks for coming.